distressing things from the internet.
The poor woman you're seeing was just awoken suddenly in the middle of the night by a massive explosion, and you can just tell by the look on her face that she's in complete shock here. Despite having plenty of horrifying footage and heartbreaking stories attached to it, the 2008 Sunrise propane explosion rarely gets discussed anymore online, and for that reason, I knew I had to talk about it.
What the fuck?
I'll tell you everything, but as usual, let's get into the backstories first. This entry begins in the Downsview neighborhood of Toronto, Ontario in the early morning hours of August 10th.
Oh, it's a Canadian thing. No, that's why no one talks about it.
And it really should have just been like any other Sunday morning. It was around 3 a.m. and so most families and individuals were asleep, although some others were just getting in from late shifts or even waking up for longer commutes. Toronto is very busy, and in a neighborhood like this, it's never really totally quiet. But asleep or not, many people were about to feel, hear, or see something that they absolutely never expected. At around 3:50 a.m., the sound of an enormous explosion ripped through Downsview. The blast shook the ground hard enough to wake thousands of people, prompting many to go to their windows and see what was going on. Many residents began recording as this was happening, and seconds later came even more explosions. At this point, windows were shattering, car alarms were going off, and some people even thought a plane had crashed. And we'll get to exactly what caused this, but first, I want you to see some of these videos. They're pretty crazy.
4 a.m. and this huge explosion. Do you know guys know what's happening?
I don't know, nobody knows.
It was a huge explosion. Yeah, it woke me up.
That is terrifying. What the fuck?
To me, looks like a plane crashed down.
That's a way bigger explosion. Jesus!
Holy shit. Holy shit.
That's bigger than a plane crash.
Oh my god.
I felt that heat.
I felt that explosion.
God damn.
Look, it just knocked out power.
Fairly quickly, the source was identified as Sunrise Propane Industrial Gases, a large propane storage and transfer facility located—
Oh my god, it literally is right next to a bunch of houses.
Beale Street and Wilson Avenue, and this wasn't in some super industrial area. It was adjacent to residential neighborhoods. At around 3:50 a.m., a massive propane leak ignited, causing a chain reaction of explosions that lit up the night sky and sent fireballs hundreds of feet into the air.
Certainly looked like a sunrise.
The force was powerful enough to send debris flying well beyond the property. Propane tanks exploded one after the other, nearby structures were set on fire, and photos were taken that make this look like Armageddon.
Yo!
Emergency crews immediately descended on the area. Firefighters worked extremely hard to keep the flames from spreading, while police raced to evacuate people in surrounding areas.
Hank's gonna be pissed? Yeah.
And something so terrifying about these situations, in my opinion, is the constant
Hank
risk
Hill
of
would be
another massive
devastated.
blast. Like, the fire alone is already a lot, but early on you essentially have no idea what could potentially come next. And it's things like this that just give me so much respect for first responders. Like, it's one thing to hear about these situations, but I always try to actually put myself in their shoes. To me, this is an absolute nightmare. A large evacuation zone was ordered about 1.6 kilometers in every direction from the site, covering roughly 12,000 residents. People were told to leave their homes immediately, often with no time to grab belongings, and public transit buses were brought in to move evacuees to reception centers. Because of the height and thickness of the smoke, a no-fly zone was even put in place until it dissipated.
Real-life fallout would definitely freak me out.
The busiest highway in North—
Freak you out. Real-life fallout would freak you out, would it? What kind of statement is that? It would freak you out? It'd be the end of the fucking world, basically. Yeah, dude, if a fallout happened, I'd be really freaked out, man. I'd be kind of scared. Be a little freaked, you know?
North America, the source of much of my life stress, the 401,
Be a little bit
was
scared
completely
if
shut
nuclear
down in
war
both
happened,
directions
guys.
for several kilometers, and seeing it completely empty like this is always wild.
Jeepers.
As everything was still going on, residents waited in shelters and community centers for news and updates. Schools were also utilized. When the official updates finally began to roll in, it was confirmed that 2 people had passed away, which, looking at some of these videos, it's hard to believe that the toll wasn't much higher though, so at least that part is relieving. The first victim was an employee of Sunrise Propane, a 25-year-old man named Parminder. and he was actually on site at the time of the explosions.
Oh, shit.
One other coworker named Felipe reportedly told him that he saw smoke and urged Parminder to start running. But it seems that he didn't understand the urgency of the situation as he went towards the smoke instead, possibly trying to inspect what was going on. Parminder was an Indian exchange student who worked here part-time and was identified through DNA testing. He'd only been here for 8 months. Toronto Fire Services also lost one of their own that morning. 55-year-old District Chief Bob Leake, who tragically suffered a fatal heart attack while assisting at the scene.
That's how he dies? He doesn't die from the explosion, he dies from a heart attack? Okay, that just sucks. Wow. I thought the other dude was gonna die from he doesn't even die from the explosion. Man.
He was a 25-year veteran who is to this day remembered very fondly and was known to be a very hardworking and diligent man. The investigation into the cause of the disaster
technically only one person died from the explosion.
Was thorough, and the findings pointed to a prohibited procedure: truck-to-truck propane transfers. Sunrise Propane had been warned against this practice before, but on the night of the explosion, liquid propane was being transferred between 2 trucks when a hose failed, releasing the gas. The escaping propane found an ignition source, though investigators couldn't determine exactly what sparked it. This is exactly why this sort of transfer is prohibited though: leaks and fire risks. Once ignited, the fire spread too quickly for anyone on site to control. Felipe, the man I mentioned previously who tried to urge his now deceased coworker to leave, claimed that he performed these illegal truck-to-truck transfers every single day because of orders from his bosses, and that he had no idea they were even illegal in Ontario. He also saw many other unsafe and illegal practices while working at this location.
Well, you're telling me that the CEO of a company is forcing workers to do illegal, dangerous activities that are life-threatening without them knowing? What?
On top of the loss of human life, the sheer scale of the damage was undeniable. Cleanup crews worked diligently for days, and air quality even became another concern. Tests would reveal asbestos contamination in the areas closest to the explosion, forcing some residents to remain displaced for much longer while specialized cleaning was done. Hundreds of homes had been affected. Many had windows blown out, damaged roofs, and other costly damages due to the massive shockwave. And the poor woman I showed you in the beginning was one of the people who experienced this. You can just see how in shock she is.
The windows blew, and the door, the glass, fell on my bed.
Oh, God.
And my sister started screaming.
But I also do want to point out that
fucking
she was
war
just
happening
woken up to this out
outside.
of nowhere, and now she has a gigantic light beaming into her eyes as she tries to answer news crews. So that probably adds to why she looks so wide-eyed. But I have no doubt this was very traumatic for her.
She's seen some shit.
The legal consequences followed years later. In 2013...
Wait, CEOs can be bad? This might be a hot take, chat, but yeah, CEOs kind of suck. You know what I'm saying?
Sunrise Propane and 2 of its directors were found guilty of violating provincial environmental and safety laws. In 2016, they were fined $5.3 million. The city of Toronto sought compensation for cleanup costs, which had already reached into the millions, and civil lawsuits from residents also moved forward, seeking damages for the loss of property and emotional distress caused by the blast and evacuation. Unfortunately, the blast itself was only the beginning for many who had to deal with insurance battles and long repairs. For the families of Parminder and Bob Leake, the loss was permanent. Saini went to work that night expecting a routine shift, and Leake responded to a call to protect others.
I think Luigi was onto something.
Simply because he was close by when it happened. But neither returned home. Rest in peace to both of these men. In the 1980s, hang gliding was well into its golden era. It had been attempted as early as the 1880s, but its true experimental beginnings started in Southern California in the 1970s. And by the mid-80s, it had grown into an organized community with
Luigi didn't do anything? Nothing's been proven? Good point.
Quite a bit of clubs across the United States and abroad. Gliders were moving away from the simple wing designs of the early days and into sleek...
Dude, this shit always, like, confused the fuck out of me. Like, this...
higher performance models.
Let's jump off a
capable of
big
aerobatics
cliff with
and
just like a
longer
little
distance flights.
plane
The
thingy.
community was very tight too. Pilots
Some
gathered at
wings
coastal
and
cliffs
hope
and
for the
mountain
best.
launches, often camping together and sharing techniques. Safety standards were improving, but accidents were still common and stories of tragic losses did circulate widely. In 1986, a man named Dan Murphy entered an aerobatic hang gliding
Look at that
competition in
mustache.
Telluride, Colorado.
That's an 80s mustache
Besides,
right
high
there.
elevation would mean thinner air than coastal pilots like Dan were used to, but Dan was already very experienced by this point, and he saw pushing boundaries as necessary. I mean, this guy was essentially a pioneer. He held the United States Hang Gliding Association's highest skill rating, Master, and he had a background as a commercial pilot. The plan was to do a
Pig, do
clean
you wish
loop
you had that mustache? I could grow out that. Look at my mustache right now. Are you kidding me? If I grow this bad boy out?
which is an
on.
aerobatic maneuver at roughly 1,500 feet above the terrain, and a nearby spectator would film as he started doing this. Strong winds were already becoming problematic on this day for many hang gliders, but most people
I don't know why that's so funny that they're just running and then the gliders.
1,500 feet above the terrain, and a nearby spectator would film as he started doing this. Strong winds were
I'm
already
ready.
becoming problematic on this
I'm
day
ready to
for
go.
many hang gliders, but most people were just having small mishaps. Nonetheless, this wind would end up throwing Dan off during his loop, and the glider stalled in the thin air, causing serious structural failure to come next. Pieces separated and both of Dan's parachutes became entangled in the wreckage, meaning there was no standard or reserve recovery option left. And what happened next, you may have actually seen at some
Oh,
point, as it was
shit.
shown on television quite a bit for a couple decades, and it later circulated inside the community as a cautionary training reference. But for
Oh my
approximately 2 minutes and 20 seconds, Dan and his broken airframe fell into a desperate spiral, where he did
Oh,
about
God.
63 full rotations. More and more pieces kept falling off, attempts to release the parachutes would fail, and the smoke from his flare was surrounding him and suffocating him the entire
Oh
way down.
my god.
The woman filming, a lady named Karma, continues to do so all the way until Dan eventually vanishes behind the trees, hitting the ground below. And we can't see any of the moment of impact, but there wouldn't have been too much to see. Because miraculously,
Holy.
not only did Dan not pass away from this incident, he was completely uninjured, minus a few bruises.
Hold
Dan was
up.
understandably completely relieved, as he had already accepted that he was going to go.
Giga
And
Chad?
this tape became a classic inside the sport. It forced a lot of safety conversations regarding things like
What?
energy management and how quickly routine flights can
How?
go wrong under certain conditions. But also because he's an absolute badass and didn't let this bother him at all. He was immediately eager to get back into the sky and
Oh no, don't tell me. That's not the tragedy, chat. That's not the tragedy. That was just his Giga Chad moment. The tragedy's
honestly, context
gonna
does
happen.
matter here. I know some people may be quick to say he's just reckless, but Dan's reputation wasn't at all built on reckless flying. At Fort Funston in San Francisco, where he spent most of his time, he was recognized for skill and control.
He was just
He could
aura
execute
farming,
precision
yeah.
landings and unusual demonstrations that other experienced pilots still talk about, and within that circle, he was seen as someone with judgment and who valued safety. So the Telluride accident didn't turn into a bragging point for him at all. He used it as training data for himself and others, a lesson. But as good as Dan's story seems to be going, he would eventually end up meeting a heartbreaking fate. And believe it or
Oh,
not,
man.
it wouldn't take place in the sky.
Dan.
Around 20 years after the Telluride incident, on Monday, August 21st, 2006, a now 48-year-old Dan Murphy rolled into the Ford parking lot on his motorcycle for a sunset flight.
Oh
Other
no,
pilots
he
were
died
with
on his motorcycle.
him at this time, including fellow flyer and friend Kurt Schmitz. As they were waiting in the parking lot preparing for the flight ahead and having some good conversation, nothing at all seemed out of the ordinary.
Trigger
At least for
warning.
the first bit, because then, without warning, a random 59-year-old man named Will Smith, who had been seen
What? What?
loitering in the area, walked up and fired at Dan close range in the head. He then went on to shoot Kurt in the back and appeared to aim
What?
at a third person, but his gun jammed.
I-
There was no confrontation, no dispute or lead up. It was just a completely random attack.
What? What has happened? What?
Paramedics rushed Dan to San Francisco.
There's no way Dan lives, bro. There's no way Dan lives.
General Hospital, where he was placed on life support. Friends, family, and pilots gathered, waiting on updates as doctors monitored the swelling in his brain. And Dan fought hard for several days, but sadly, on Saturday, August 20th.
Oh, dude, I thought this story was just gonna be about how fucking badass Dan is. And they're just gonna be like, yeah, Dan survived. And he's completely fine. That's what I thought it was gonna end with. Man. That's how he dies? Are you kidding me?
2006, he passed away as a result of the gunshot injury. Kurt, the other victim, underwent surgery.
That is not how I saw this story going.
And did survive his wounds. For his friends who flew at Fort Funston, that week absolutely crushed them. Many remembered him as a true free spirit and just said it's unbelievable to think that this even happened. Dan was good at everything he picked up, not just hang gliding, but as a scuba diver, a motorcyclist, and plenty more.
Of course.
Dan Murphy returned to the sky, not just in spirit,
Fucking
but
Will
his
Smith,
ashes
dude.
were spread across Fort Funston off of a hang glider from beloved friends. It really is just a heartbreaking story. Rest in peace to this amazing man.
Dude, no one would have known about Dan if we didn't watch this video chat. Now we know about Dan. I feel like that's a W in of itself. Because now we know about Dan. Why would Will Smith shoot him? I don't know. Will Smith's done some crazy things, man.
This one is short as it's one of those very local cases that never got all that much coverage or really ever even left its home state. But I want to start by saying that the boy at the center of today's story, 15-year-old Jesse Tucker, was a real kid with a real family and friends. And this story is going to be hard to tell, but it should be. Huh? I know that goes for pretty much everything I cover, but I do like to remind people of this the odd time, and so that's why I said it. Jesse Tucker was a 15-year-old freshman at Martinsville High School in Martinsville, Indiana. He had 3 siblings, 2 brothers and a sister, and on Friday, March 10th, 2006, he was just expecting another ordinary day at school. And for the most part, that's what he would get. He'd wake up still a little bit groggy, get his bag together, pack his books, and be on his way. Jesse would attend his early morning classes, one that he wasn't too thrilled about, and over a few hours, he'd start to finally wake up a bit. Eventually, it became lunch period, just after noon, and he and a few friends were headed to the cafeteria to get their food. One thing that sort of sucked is that there was this new rule in place at Martinsville High where kids would have to remain in the cafeteria while they ate their food, and so no one really liked this. They preferred to just take their food and go to their normal hangout spots. And so many kids tried to find strategies like hiding the food, maybe sitting down and eating their lunch very quickly, or just skipping lunch altogether. But Jesse had a different idea, and on this day he was ready to try it. As he and his friends were leaving the cafeteria, Jesse took a large bite from a hamburger. He pretty much just stuffed the whole thing in his mouth, and then he left the cafeteria so he didn't have to bore himself with sitting in there. Now, there could have been some element of him messing around here. Maybe he was protesting the rule, or maybe he was just genuinely in a rush. We don't exactly know, but either way, poor Jesse horribly began to choke on his burger as he left the cafeteria.
No.
He tried to clear out the blockage himself, but he couldn't, and other
Dude. Are you kidding me?
Clearly began to see that he was in distress. Some friends and teachers jumped in and attempted the Heimlich maneuver, but couldn't dislodge the food. But also there happened to be nurses in the building that day for a blood drive, and so they too reached Jesse, and they were able to remove some of the food obstructing his airway, but unfortunately it was just too late. This would all be futile. Emergency crews transported him to Morgan County Hospital and Medical Center in Martinsville, where a team worked for about 45 minutes to resuscitate him, but in the end, poor Jesse would be pronounced deceased.
He died from one-shotting a burger? Are you serious?
Police said he appeared to have gone into cardiac.
Dude, this video is definitely distressing because these are like the most random ways to die.
Arrest just before arriving at the hospital. There's just something so tragic about this. Like, I saw an account from someone who was there when this happened. That's actually what prompted me to look into the case. The kid choking on a hamburger at this age when he's leaving his cafeteria.
That's so sad, dude.
The fact that he actually couldn't be saved, it's just a surreal story, and it's really sad. Jesse was 15 years old in his first year of high school, and I know it's a trite saying, but he really did have so much ahead of him. Choking is such a serious thing, and yet still many people don't imagine it'll ever happen to them or someone around them. Even in some cases, the worst still happens. Like, people around Jesse did act. Friends tried the Heimlich, nurses stepped in, and medics worked on him for a prolonged period before and after his hospital arrival. But of course, in a crisis like this, every single situation is different, and sometimes things just don't line up perfectly to the point that everyone can be saved. Rest in peace to poor Jesse Tucker, and my heart is with his family. In the early months of 2022, a quiet neighborhood in Las Vegas was the setting
That's
of
how a lot of people pass away, is choking while living alone. Isn't that how a lot of old people pass away? Because like they don't have anyone who lives with them anymore. That's so sad.
heartbreaking story that has received a surprisingly small amount of attention. In fact, until someone recommended this to me on my Discord server, I hadn't even heard of it at all. Just a warning, this is pretty sad, but the way it got solved was very brave, so I wanted to tell it. It all begins with a little girl at a local school in Las Vegas who the teachers knew fairly well. But over a period of time, and especially in and around early 2022, they were sort of beginning to tell that something kind of felt off with her. They didn't know for sure, but they did have to keep an eye on her as this wasn't something that they hadn't seen before. It's all too common for kids to have some serious stuff going on at home. In this situation, the teachers wanted to tread lightly at first with her behavior, but in time, they wouldn't even end up having to dig that deep into it, as the little girl herself would end up giving them details that told them everything they needed to know and pushed them to contact the police. See, on one day at school, this girl brought a series of notes with her that she would hide in her sock and then muster up the courage to give to the teachers before the end of the day.
Oh, man.
What was on these notes was more than enough to get law enforcement involved. But before I tell you exactly what was on them, let me give you some context.
Oh boy.
Back at home, things weren't just bad, they were absolutely horrible for this girl and her family. Her mother, and her brother. For months, the mother, whose name will also be kept private, lived under the control of the boyfriend she was with, a man who stripped her of her basic freedoms. Her phone was taken away early on, her movements were closely watched, and in time she wasn't even allowed to leave the house alone without her.
Another smart kid.
Every bit of freedom was denied to her, and this escalated to the point where she would be kept in handcuffs. And of course, by extension, this girl as well as her brother would be subject to this as well, though the focal point for this boyfriend was clearly the mother. Or at least in the beginning it was. By December of 2021, this poor mother had noticed that her
Don't show a picture. Don't show, because I know what that means, bro. Don't show a picture of the kid, because I know what that means.
4-year-old son seemed to kind of just be missing from the home. She feared the worst, but had no way to confirm what had happened to him. And I understand that may be confusing, but remember, she was being held captive, and so it's likely the man was making up stories or just keeping her confined to one room at this point. We don't know the exact details. But amidst this confinement, this brave mother found a small but critical way to fight back. She wrote notes explaining her captivity and her concern that her son might be deceased. As you've probably pieced together, these notes were eventually entrusted to her daughter. The young girl now carried a burden far beyond her years, but in the mom's words, "I was trying to think of any time that we would go to a store or any chance that I got to give this to someone, and ultimately, the only way that I knew for sure was through my daughter." It was a heavy responsibility, but one that would ultimately change everything. On that seemingly ordinary day at school, the daughter began slipping the notes to her teacher. The messages were very obviously a plea for help. The mother explained how she was being held against her will, that her phone had been taken months ago, and that she feared for her son's life. One note said, "Please help, took my phone months ago, pretending to be me, cameras on house and app, and he can see down the street, will avoid police."
Oh my god.
Thankfully, the teacher's reaction was immediate, and recognizing the severity of the situation, school officials quickly contacted law enforcement. Police responded with urgency, understanding that every moment counted here. And eventually they tracked down the vehicle tied to the family and pulled it over. Inside was the woman. She was alive but visibly traumatized, and there was plenty of evidence already of the harsh conditions that she had endured. Everything that they were seeing confirmed the notes that her daughter had brought forward. And so, the notes actually worked. But sadly, the horror was not over. As the investigation moved to the family residence, the grim reality began to set in for investigators. In the garage freezer, officers discovered the body of the missing boy.
Come on,
The child had been hidden away, marking a highly chilling final chapter for the story. Further examination revealed a freshly dug hole in the backyard, along with a U-Haul truck containing dirt, indicating attempts to conceal or move his remains later on. These discoveries, of course, deepened the tragedy and raised disturbing questions about what had transpired in the months prior. The evil man allegedly behind this case, Brandon Tosland, was arrested and charged with serious crimes, including first-degree murder, kidnapping, and domestic violence. Their community was left stunned by the cruelty involved, but like myself, were also moved by the bravery of the daughter and mother, whose courage in delivering those notes was the key that unlocked the truth. And if it wasn't for this, the nightmare may have never been brought to light. But now, justice could finally begin. In the aftermath, the mother and daughter were placed in protective care, starting a long and difficult road towards recovery. While the legal process continues against Brandon Toslin, the community focus remains on supporting the two and preventing future tragedies.
What a piece of shit.
This whole thing just
man.
serves as a painful
Into the wood
reminder of how
chipper.
easily victims can be
Yes,
silenced.
I agree.
But it also shows how, if the circumstances are right, a single act of courage like the mother and daughters could change everything. I haven't found any super recent updates on Brandon's case, but the last I saw, his trial was rescheduled from early 2024 to March 2025. But since there's no new updates, there's a chance that it was rescheduled again.
Dude,
Honestly,
why
just
does
couldn't-
that happen all the time, bro? I feel like that always happens. It's like, oh yeah, you get to live free for the next like 3 years because we're gonna keep rescheduling your sentencing.
Find anything else. All I can say is that I hope this despicable human being faces the justice he deserves. Rest in peace to this poor boy.
God, that's so sad, dude.
That's gonna do it for this one, guys. Thank you so much for
Oh man, this video is a goddamn roller coaster. That was a roller coaster.